When successful tech CEO Victoria Ashford's luxury SUV skidded off the mountain road during the worst blizzard in decades, she never imagined that being rescued by a rugged single father would completely transform her life. But what happened over the next 72 hours in that remote cabin will shock you, because by the time the storm cleared, two complete strangers from opposite worlds were planning their wedding. Before we dive into this incredible true story of unexpected love, tell us in the comments where you're watching from tonight. And if this story touches your heart the way it touched ours, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have something even more amazing that will leave you speechless. This is the story of how a corporate ice queen learned what really matters, how a struggling single dad discovered he was worthy of extraordinary love, and how 72 hours of being snowed in together created a bond that changed everything. But their path to love wasn't easy, because what Victoria was hiding about her company and what Daniel was running from in his past nearly destroyed their chance at happiness before it even began. Daniel Jordan stood at the kitchen window of his small mountain cabin, watching 6-year-old Emma build a snowman in their backyard. The morning light caught the copper highlights in her curly hair, so much like her mother's, and for a moment his chest tightened with the familiar ache of loss. 3 years had passed since the accident, but some mornings still felt like yesterday. "Daddy, come help me!" Emma called, her breath forming little clouds in the crisp mountain air. "Mr. Snowman needs a face!" Daniel smiled, setting down his coffee mug. At 32, he'd learned to find joy in these simple moments. After losing his wife Rachel in a car accident, he left his demanding job as a software engineer in Denver, selling their house and moving to this remote cabin near the small town of Pine Ridge. Here, surrounded by the Colorado Rockies, he could focus on what truly mattered: raising Emma and healing their broken hearts. The cabin wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, a stone fireplace, and a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people, but it was theirs. Daniel made ends meet by working remotely for a small tech startup, fixing computers for locals and doing odd jobs around town. Mrs. Peterson from the general store often brought them homemade soup, and Tom Martinez, the retired forest ranger next door, helped with Emma whenever Daniel had to travel for work. The weather service is calling for a big storm tonight. Might want to stock up on supplies. These mountain blizzards can trap you for days. Daniel took the advice seriously, loading up on groceries and ensuring their generator was ready. Living this far from town meant being prepared for anything. He'd learned that lesson the hard way during their first winter here. As he stepped outside to help Emma with her snowman, Daniel noticed the wind picking up, sending snow swirling across their small clearing. The sky was growing darker, though it was barely noon. The storm was coming early. "Daddy, look!" Emma pointed toward the winding mountain road that led to our cabin. "There's a car!" Daniel squinted through the increasing snow. A black luxury SUV was climbing the steep, narrow road that dead-ended at our property. Strange. Nobody came up here by accident, especially not in weather like this. The vehicle moved slowly, obviously struggling with the icy conditions. "Let's go inside, sweetheart," Daniel said, scooping Emma up. "Whoever that is, they're about to get stuck in a blizzard." Through the window, they watched the SUV slide sideways on the icy road before coming to a stop about 100 yards from their cabin. The driver seemed to be trying to back up, but the wheels just spun uselessly on the ice. Daniel grabbed his heavy coat. "Emma, stay inside and keep warm by the fire, okay? I need to help whoever's out there." The wind hit him like a wall as he stepped outside. The temperature had dropped at least 20 degrees in the past hour, and the snow was coming down so hard he could barely see the stranded vehicle. This was no ordinary storm. This was going to be a full-scale mountain blizzard. As he approached the SUV, struggling against the wind, Daniel could see someone moving around inside. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a woman who clearly had no business being on a mountain road in weather like this. She wore an expensive-looking wool coat, designer boots that had no traction, and her long dark hair whipped around her face in the howling wind. "Are you insane?" she shouted over the storm, though Daniel could barely hear her. "This road doesn't go anywhere!" "Lady, you need to get inside right now," he yelled back, pointing toward his cabin. "This storm's gonna get a lot worse." She looked back at her SUV, then at the swirling snow around them. Even in the few minutes she'd been outside, a thin layer of ice had already formed on her expensive coat. For a moment, she hesitated, looking back at her vehicle with its leather seats and heated interior. Then, another gust of wind nearly knocked them both over, and survival instinct kicked in. "What about my car?" she asked, already following Daniel toward the cabin. "It's not going anywhere in this storm." Daniel guided her through the deepening snow. "We'll worry about it when the weather clears." They stumbled through the cabin door just as the full force of the blizzard hit. The wind howled like a living thing, rattling the windows and sending snow swirling in every direction. Through the frosted glass, they could barely make out the dark shape of the stranded SUV already half buried in drifting snow. Emma looked up from her coloring book by the fireplace, her green eyes wide with curiosity. "Daddy, who's the pretty lady?" The woman stood dripping in Daniel's small entryway, looking completely out of place in her designer clothes. Her dark hair was plastered to her head with melted snow, and she was shivering despite her expensive coat. She started, then seemed to catch herself. "I'm Victoria. Thank you for—" She gestured vaguely at the warm cabin around them. "This is very kind." Daniel studied her face, noting how she'd hesitated before giving her name. There was something guarded about her, something that suggested she wasn't used to depending on strangers for help. "Daniel Jordan. And that's Emma. Looks like you're going to be our guest for a while." Outside, the storm raged with increasing fury. The weather radio crackled to life with emergency warnings. "All mountain roads now impassable. Expect 3 to 4 feet of snow. Travel not recommended for the next 72 hours. Victoria's face went pale as the reality of the situation sank in. She pulled out her phone, staring at the no-service message on the screen. 72 hours? She whispered. Daniel nodded grimly. "Welcome to mountain living. Hope you didn't have anywhere important to be." But as Victoria sank onto his old couch, still shivering and looking lost, Daniel had no idea that he'd just rescued one of the most powerful women in corporate America, and Victoria had no clue that this humble single father was about to turn her carefully controlled world completely upside down. The blizzard howled outside, trapping them together in ways neither could have imagined. In just 72 hours, everything they thought they knew about love, family, and what really mattered in life was about to change forever. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The full force of the blizzard hit like a freight train at exactly 2:47 p.m. Daniel had been checking the weather radio every few minutes, watching the storm warnings grow more severe by the hour. What had started as a routine winter storm advisory had escalated into a complete mountain emergency. All residents of Pine Ridge County are advised to shelter in place immediately. Wind gusts exceeding 80 miles per hour, whiteout conditions, and temperatures dropping to -20 degrees Fahrenheit. This is now classified as a historic blizzard event. Victoria stood at the small kitchen window, her manicured fingers pressed against the frosted glass, watching her luxury SUV disappear beneath an ever-growing mound of snow. In the span of 2 hours, what had been a minor inconvenience had become a complete disaster. "How often does this happen?" she asked, her voice tight with barely controlled anxiety. Daniel looked up from where he was building blocks with Emma on the living room floor. Even in crisis, his daughter's needs came first, a fact that hadn't gone unnoticed by Victoria. "A storm this bad? Maybe once every 10 years, Daniel replied honestly. "The last one trapped my neighbor Tom for 5 days. That's why everyone up here keeps emergency supplies." Victoria's perfectly composed facade cracked slightly. 5 days? "Don't worry," Daniel said, noting her rising panic. "We're prepared. Food, water, generator for power, plenty of firewood. The cabin is solid. My grandfather built it to withstand mountain weather." But Victoria wasn't worried about physical survival. She was worried about Ashford Technologies' board meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning, the meeting where she was supposed to announce the merger that would save her struggling company. She was worried about the dozens of employees depending on her leadership. She was worried about the hostile takeover bid that would succeed if she wasn't there to fight it. Most of all, she was worried about maintaining the carefully constructed image that had taken her 15 years to build. She started, then seemed to catch herself. "I'm Victoria. Thank you for," she gestured vaguely at the warm cabin around them. "This is very kind." Daniel studied her face, noting how she'd hesitated before giving her name. There was something guarded about her, something that suggested she wasn't used to depending on strangers for help. "Daniel Jordan. And that's Emma. Looks like you're going to be our guest for a while." Outside, the storm raged with increasing fury. The weather radio crackled to life with emergency warnings. "All mountain roads now impassable. Expect 3 to 4 feet of snow. Travel not recommended for the next 72 hours. Victoria's face went pale as the reality of the situation sank in. She pulled out her phone, staring at the no-service message on the screen. 72 hours? She whispered. Daniel nodded grimly. "Welcome to mountain living. Hope you didn't have anywhere important to be."
I help run a company, Victoria said finally. "A lot of people are counting on me to be somewhere tomorrow." Daniel studied her face, noting the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept checking her phone every few seconds. He recognized the signs of someone carrying enormous responsibility. He'd seen the same expression in his own mirror during his corporate days in Denver. "What kind of company?" he asked quietly. Victoria's walls went up immediately. "Technology, software solutions." She moved away from the window, pacing the small living room like a caged animal. "Nothing you'd know about." The dismissive tone wasn't lost on Daniel, but he didn't take the bait. Living in the mountains had taught him patience, and raising Emma had taught him that sometimes people said hurtful things when they were scared. "Try me," Daniel said mildly. "I used to work in tech before we moved up here." Victoria stopped pacing, really looking at him for the first time. His flannel shirt and work boots had led her to assume he was just another mountain local, but there was something in his eyes, an intelligence and understanding that suggested depths she hadn't expected. "You worked in technology?" she asked, skepticism clear in her voice. "Software engineering for Morrison Systems in Denver, specialized in database architecture and security protocols. Left 3 years ago after my wife died." The casual mention of such a profound loss caught Victoria off guard. She had been expecting to dismiss him as a simple mountain man, but grief was something she understood. Her own father had died 5 years ago, leaving her to fight for control of the company he'd built from nothing. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, her defensive posture softening slightly. "That must have been terrible." "It was," Daniel acknowledged simply, "but we survived. Sometimes life forces you to choose what really matters." Emma looked up from her blocks, sensing the shift in the room's emotional temperature. "Mommy's in heaven," she announced matter-of-factly, "but she still loves us, right, Daddy?" "That's right, sweetheart," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. Victoria watched the interaction between father and daughter, something twisting in her chest. She had built her entire identity around being strong, independent, untouchable, but there was something about Daniel's gentle strength, his openness about loss and love, that made her carefully constructed walls feel suddenly fragile. The lights flickered, drawing everyone's attention to the ceiling. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, rattling the cabin's sturdy frame. "That'll be tree branches hitting the power lines," Daniel said, moving to the kitchen. "I better start the generator before we lose electricity completely." As he pulled on his heavy coat and gloves, preparing to venture into the storm, Victoria found herself moving to the window, watching his shadowy figure disappear into the swirling snow. For reasons she couldn't explain, her heart didn't settle until she saw him return, snow-covered but safe. "All set," Daniel announced, stomping snow off his boots. "We've got power for at least a week if we're careful." As if on cue, the main power went out, plunging the cabin into the warm glow of the generator-powered lights. Outside, the storm raged with increasing fury, cutting them off from the world completely. Victoria sank onto the couch, the full reality of her situation finally hitting her. She was trapped, utterly and completely trapped, with a widowed father and his 6-year-old daughter in a tiny mountain cabin. No phone, no internet, no way to control the crisis that was undoubtedly unfolding at her company. For the first time in 15 years, Victoria Ashford was completely powerless. And somehow, in the warm glow of the cabin's lights, with Emma's innocent chatter and Daniel's steady presence, that terrifying loss of control was beginning to feel less like a disaster and more like something else entirely. Something she wasn't ready to name yet, but couldn't ignore. The storm raged on, and with each passing hour, Victoria's old life felt farther and farther away. Whether she was ready or not, the next 70 hours were going to change everything. The first night was the hardest. Victoria had never experienced such complete silence. No traffic, no city sounds, no constant hum of electronics that had been the soundtrack to her entire adult life. Just the endless howling of wind and the occasional crack of tree branches breaking under the weight of snow and ice. She lay on Daniel's couch, wrapped in a hand-knit blanket that smelled like lavender and smoke, staring at the dying embers in the stone fireplace. Every instinct screamed at her to do something, make calls, send emails, take control of the crisis that was surely erupting at her company. Instead, she was trapped in a fairy tale cottage, with a man who chopped his own firewood and a little girl who thought important business meant helping her daddy fix the neighbor's computer. Daniel had given her the couch despite her protests, insisting that Emma needed her own bed and he was perfectly comfortable in his sleeping bag on the floor. The gentlemanly gesture had both touched and frustrated Victoria. She wasn't used to men who expected nothing in return for their kindness.
Around 3 a.m., unable to sleep, Victoria found herself studying the cabin in the dim firelight. The walls were lined with family photos. Daniel and a beautiful redhead she assumed was his late wife. Emma as a baby, Christmas mornings, birthday parties. A life lived in moments rather than milestones. On the mantel sat a framed diploma from Colorado State University in computer science, dated 15 years ago. Next to it, a child's drawing labeled "My Hero Daddy" in Emma's careful handwriting. Can't sleep either? Victoria startled, turning to see Daniel emerging from the kitchen with 2 steaming mugs. He moved quietly through his own home, careful not to wake Emma. "I made tea," he said, offering her a mug. "Chamomile. My mother-in-law swore it helped with anxiety." Victoria accepted the tea gratefully, wrapping her fingers around the warm ceramic. "Thank you. I'm not used to this kind of quiet." Daniel settled into the armchair across from her, his own mug cradled in work-roughened hands. In the firelight, she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, not from the day's events, but something deeper, the bone-deep weariness of a man who'd carried too much for too long. "The silence takes getting used to," he agreed. "When we first moved here, Emma used to wake up crying because it was too quiet. She was used to city noise, sirens, traffic, our upstairs neighbor's TV." "You lived in the city before?" Victoria found herself genuinely curious about this man who seemed so at home in the wilderness. "Denver. We had a house in the suburbs, 2-car garage, the whole suburban dream. Daniel's voice carried a trace of old pain. After Rachel died, everything about that life felt wrong. Too many memories, too much noise to think clearly. Emma needed stability, and I needed to disappear. Victoria finished quietly. Daniel looked at her with surprise. Most people don't understand that impulse. Victoria stared into her tea, seeing her own reflection in the dark liquid. Sometimes I think about it, just walking away from everything, starting over somewhere nobody knows who I am. What stops you? The question hung in the air between them. Victoria had never articulated it before, but sitting in this quiet cabin with snow muffling the outside world, the truth seemed easier to admit. Fear, mostly. Fear that without the company, without the success, without all the things I've built, there wouldn't be anything left of me worth knowing. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, considering her words. You know what I learned after Rachel died? All those things we think define us, job titles, bank accounts, achievements, they're just noise. When everything else gets stripped away, what's left is who you really are, and that person is usually stronger than you think. Victoria felt something crack inside her chest, not breaking, but opening. How do you do it? Live without purpose? Who says I live without purpose? Daniel smiled, nodding toward Emma's bedroom door. I have the most important job in the world. I'm raising a human being who's going to make the world better just by being in it. But your career, your potential, don't you miss it? I miss the intellectual challenge sometimes, but I don't miss the stress, the politics, the constant pressure to achieve more, earn more, be more. Up here, success is measured differently. Did Emma laugh today? Did I help a neighbor? Did we make good memories together? Those things matter more than stock prices or quarterly reports. Victoria found herself studying his face in the firelight, searching for signs of bitterness or regret, but all she saw was a man who'd found peace with his choices, even if they'd come at tremendous cost. What was she like? Your wife? Daniel's face softened with memory. Rachel was light. She could find joy in anything. A perfect sunset, Emma's first steps, a silly joke. She had this way of making ordinary moments feel magical. He paused, lost in remembrance. She would have loved this storm, actually, would have seen it as an adventure instead of a disaster. She sounds wonderful. She was. But she's gone, and Emma and I are still here. We had to figure out how to live without her light, how to make our own magic. Daniel met Victoria's eyes across the small space. What about you? Ever been married? Victoria's carefully constructed walls slammed back into place. No, never had time for relationships. The company required total dedication. It wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. There had been relationships, carefully chosen partnerships with equally ambitious men who understood that careers came first, but nothing that had ever tempted her to imagine a different life. That must be lonely, Daniel observed without judgment. Lonely is having time to notice what's missing, Victoria replied, the response automatic after years of deflecting similar questions. I don't have that luxury. Everyone has that luxury. Some people just choose not to take it. The gentle challenge in his words stung because it hit so close to home. Victoria set down her empty mug, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. I should try to sleep. Tomorrow's going to be difficult. Daniel nodded, not pushing the conversation further. The storm's supposed to peak around noon tomorrow, then start tapering off. But even after it stops, the roads won't be passable for at least another day, maybe two. Victoria's stomach clenched at the reminder of her powerlessness. By tomorrow afternoon, the board would have voted on the merger without her input. By Thursday, Ashford Technologies could be under new management. Everything she'd worked for, everything her father had built, could be gone. Victoria,
Daniel said quietly as she settled back onto the couch. "Whatever crisis you're worried about, it'll still be there when you get back, but you'll handle it. You didn't build a successful company by giving up when things got difficult." His quiet confidence in her abilities was startling. Most people either feared her professional reputation or resented it. Daniel simply accepted it as one facet of who she was, no more or less important than any other. "How do you know I built it?" she asked. "Maybe I just inherited it." Daniel smiled in the darkness. "Because inherited money doesn't create the kind of anxiety you're carrying. That level of stress comes from feeling responsible for everyone and everything. You're not worried about losing your wealth, you're worried about failing the people who depend on you." Victoria stared at him, unsettled by how easily he'd read her. She'd spent years perfecting her professional mask, keeping her vulnerabilities hidden from competitors and employees alike. Yet this mountain hermit had seen through her defenses in less than 24 hours. "Get some rest," Daniel said gently. "Tomorrow will bring what it brings. No amount of worry will change that." As he disappeared into the kitchen to wash their mugs, Victoria pulled the blanket up to her chin and tried to quiet her racing mind. Outside, the storm continued its relentless assault, but inside the cabin felt warm and safe, and strangely peaceful. For the first time in years, Victoria Ashford fell asleep without checking her phone, without reviewing tomorrow's schedule, without mentally rehearsing the next day's battles. She simply closed her eyes and let the mountain silence carry her worries away. In her dreams, she was building snowmen with a red-haired little girl while a kind man with gentle eyes watched from the cabin porch, and for once in her life, nowhere else seemed more important to be. Victoria awoke to the smell of pancakes and the sound of Emma's delighted giggles. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The corporate penthouse she called home never smelled of anything more appetizing than coffee, and she certainly never awoke to the sound of children's laughter. Sunlight streamed through frost-covered windows, creating intricate patterns of ice crystals that looked like nature's own stained glass. Outside, the blizzard still raged, but with less fury than the night before. The world beyond the cabin had been transformed into a winter wonderland of impossible beauty. "Good morning, sleepyhead." Emma bounced over to the couch, already dressed in purple overalls with her curly hair and pigtails. "Daddy, we eat blueberry pancakes. They're my favorite." Victoria sat up, running her hands through her disheveled hair. She caught sight of herself in the antique mirror above the fireplace and barely recognized the woman staring back. No makeup, hair tousled from sleep, wearing one of Daniel's oversized flannel shirts over her designer jeans. She looked human. "Morning," Daniel called from the kitchen, his voice warm with amusement. "Coffee's ready if you're interested. Fair warning, though, it's mountain coffee. Might be stronger than what you're used to in the corporate world." Victoria padded to the kitchen in stocked feet, accepting the steaming mug he offered. The first sip made her eyes water. It was indeed stronger than anything she had ever tasted, but there was something satisfying about its bold, no-nonsense flavor. "This could wake the dead," she managed, making Emma dissolve into giggles. "That's what Daddy says. He says mountain coffee has to be strong because mountain people work hard." Daniel flipped pancakes with practiced ease, and Victoria found herself watching the domestic scene with unexpected fascination. In her world, breakfast meant grabbing a protein bar between meetings or having her assistant order something from the executive cafe. The idea of actually cooking, of sitting down together as a family, seemed both foreign and oddly appealing. "Can I help?" The offer surprised them both. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You cook?" "I can learn," Victoria said, then added with self-deprecating honesty, "though my kitchen skills are limited to operating a very expensive espresso machine." "Well, you're in luck," Daniel grinned. "Emma's an excellent teacher. She learned to make pancakes when she was 5. Emma puffed up with pride. "I can teach you, but you have to be very careful with the batter. It's tricky." For the next hour, Victoria found herself in the completely surreal position of taking cooking lessons from a 6-year-old. Emma was a patient but demanding instructor, correcting Victoria's stirring technique and explaining the importance of not over-mixing the batter. "See, you're making it tough," Emma explained seriously. "Pancakes need to be fluffy, like clouds. Daddy taught me that." Victoria caught sight of Daniel watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read, something soft and surprised, as if he was seeing something he hadn't expected. When their eyes met across the small kitchen, she felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. "You're a natural," he said quietly. "Emma doesn't warm up to strangers easily." "I'm not exactly known for being good with children," Victoria admitted, surprised by how much Emma's easy acceptance meant to her. "Maybe you just had the right teacher," Daniel suggested, nodding towards Emma, who was now demonstrating the proper pancake flipping technique with intense concentration. As they ate breakfast together around the small table, Victoria experienced something she'd forgotten existed, the simple pleasure of unhurried conversation. Emma chattered about her favorite books, her stuffed animals, and her plans for when the snow stopped. Daniel listened with the focused attention that Victoria recognized as precious beyond measure. "What's your favorite color?" Emma asked Victoria suddenly. Navy blue, I suppose. It's professional," Victoria answered automatically, then caught herself. Why had she chosen the most corporate answer possible? "That's a boring favorite color," Emma declared, with the brutal honesty of childhood. "Mine's purple, because it's the color of magic. What's your real favorite color?" Victoria paused, fork halfway to her mouth. When was the last time someone had asked her what she actually preferred, rather than what was strategically advantageous? "I used to love sunset orange," she said slowly, the memory surfacing unexpectedly. "When I was little, I thought sunsets were the most beautiful thing in the world." "See?" Emma beamed triumphantly. "That's a much better favorite color. Do you like horses?" The rapid-fire questions continued, and Victoria found herself sharing things she hadn't thought about in years. Her childhood dog, her secret dream of learning to paint, her fear of thunderstorms. Each small revelation seemed to delight Emma and intrigue Daniel in equal measure. After breakfast, when Emma settled in front of the fireplace with her coloring books, Daniel and Victoria tackled the dishes together. The kitchen was barely big enough for 2 people, and Victoria was acutely aware of Daniel's proximity. The way he moved with quiet efficiency, the scent of his soap mixing with coffee and wood smoke. "She's incredible," Victoria said, nodding toward Emma. "So confident and joyful. You're raising an amazing little person." Daniel's face lit with paternal pride. "She saved me, actually. After Rachel died, I was drowning in grief. But Emma needed me to keep going, to find reasons to smile again. She taught me that joy doesn't disappear when tragedy strikes. It just becomes more precious." Victoria studied his profile as he rinsed plates with methodical care. "How do you do it? Stay so positive after losing everything?" "I didn't lose everything," Daniel corrected gently. "I lost my wife, which was devastating, but I still had Emma. I still had my health. I still had the capacity to love and be loved." Grief has a way of clarifying what actually matters. Most people would be bitter. Bitter at who? At what? The drunk driver who hit Rachel? That would just poison Emma's childhood with my anger. At God? At fate? That won't bring Rachel back. Daniel handed Victoria a dish to dry. "I choose to be grateful for the years we had rather than angry about the years we lost." Victoria absorbed his words, thinking of her own relationship with loss. When her father died, she'd channeled her grief into work, building walls of achievement and success to protect herself from feeling that vulnerable again. Daniel had done the opposite. He'd opened himself more fully to love and connection. "I don't think I'm capable of that kind of acceptance," she admitted. "Sure you are. You just haven't needed to be yet." Daniel's eyes were kind but knowing. "Something tells me you're stronger than you think." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. In her corporate world, strength meant ruthlessness, strategic thinking, the ability to make tough decisions without emotional interference. Daniel saw a different kind of strength in her, something more fundamental and human. "Victoria, can you braid hair?" Emma's voice interrupted their conversation. She stood holding a brush and colorful hair ties, looking hopeful. I've never tried, but I can learn." Emma's face broke into a delighted grin. "Yes, Daddy tries, but he's not very good at it. His braids are all bumpy." "Hey now," Daniel protested with mock indignation. "My braids are functional. That's what matters." "Functional is not beautiful," Emma declared, with the authority of someone who clearly knew the difference. Victoria found herself sitting on the couch with Emma between her knees, carefully sectioning the little girl's curly hair. Her manicured fingers, more accustomed to typing on keyboards, moved slowly and deliberately. "Tell me about your job," Emma said as Victoria worked. "Daddy said you work with computers, like he used to." Victoria's hands stilled for a moment. How could she explain corporate acquisitions and market dominance to a 6-year-old? "I help companies work together," she said finally. "Sometimes businesses need help solving problems or becoming better at what they do. Like when Daddy fixes Mrs. Patterson's computer when it gets sick? Something like that." Victoria smiled despite herself. "Except instead of computers, I fix whole companies." "That sounds really important," Emma said seriously. "Do you like it?" The innocent question stopped Victoria cold. Did she like her work? She was good at it, successful at it, feared and respected for it. But did she actually enjoy the constant pressure, the endless strategic maneuvering, the loneliness at the top? "It's complicated," Victoria said eventually, finishing Emma's braid with a small sense of triumph. Emma twisted around to look at her with those discerning green eyes. "Daddy said if something makes you happy, it's not complicated. It's only complicated when it makes you sad, but you don't want to admit it." The wisdom of children, Victoria thought, could be devastatingly accurate. "There," she announced, eager to change the subject. "How does it look?"
Emma ran to the mirror and squealed with delight. "It's perfect! Look, Daddy! Victoria made my hair beautiful!" Daniel examined his daughter's handiwork with exaggerated seriousness. "Much better than my bumpy braids. I think we have a new official hair braider in the family." The casual use of the word family sent an unexpected warmth through Victoria's chest. When was the last time she'd felt like she belonged somewhere, was needed for something more than her business acumen? Outside, the storm showed signs of weakening, but inside the cabin, something else was building. A connection Victoria had never experienced before, as fragile and beautiful as the ice crystals on the windows, and just as likely to melt when exposed to the harsh light of her real world. The afternoon brought an unexpected lull in the storm. The howling wind had diminished to occasional gusts, and patches of pale sunlight struggled through the heavy gray clouds. Victoria stood at the kitchen sink, washing lunch dishes, while Emma napped on the couch, exhausted from a morning of building a blanket fort that had taken over most of the living room. Daniel was outside, clearing snow from around the generator and checking for any storm damage to the cabin's exterior. Through the window, Victoria watched him work with the same methodical efficiency she'd noticed in everything he did. His movements were economical, purposeful, those of a man who understood that wasted motion was wasted energy. Her phone, which had been silent since yesterday, suddenly vibrated against the kitchen counter. Victoria's heart leaped. Had service somehow been restored? But when she grabbed the device, she saw it was just the low battery warning. In less than an hour, her last connection to the outside world would be gone. She stared at the device in her hands, this sleek piece of technology that had once felt like an extension of her nervous system. How many thousands of messages must be waiting? How many urgent calls had gone unanswered? By now, the board would have convened their emergency session. Without her there to fight it, the hostile takeover bid from Meridian Corp would likely succeed. Everything she'd built, everything her father had dreamed of, could be gone. The phone slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering onto the kitchen floor. The sound woke Emma, who sat up in her blanket nest, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Victoria, are you okay?" Emma's small voice was thick with concern. Victoria quickly retrieved her phone, forcing a smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just clumsy." But Emma had inherited her father's ability to read people. She scrambled out of her blanket for it and padded over to Victoria on bare feet, her green eyes serious and knowing. "You look like Daddy did when he got the scary phone call about Grandma being sick. Are you worried about someone you love?" The innocent question hit Victoria like a physical blow. Was there anyone she loved? Her father was gone. She had no siblings, no close friends, just business associates and competitors. Her entire world revolved around Ashford Technologies, and if that was gone... The phone slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering onto the kitchen floor. "I might lose something very important to me," Victoria said carefully, sinking down to Emma's level. "Like what?" How could she explain corporate warfare to a 6-year-old? How could she describe the hollow fear of losing your identity along with your life's work? "My company, the place where I work, some bad people want to take it away from me." Emma's face scrunched in confusion. "But why would they want to take your job? Don't they have their own jobs?" "It's complicated, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups fight over things like money and power." "That's stupid," Emma declared with the moral clarity that only children possessed. "Daddy says sharing is better than fighting. Why don't you just share your company with them?" Before Victoria could attempt to explain the complexities of corporate acquisitions, the front door opened and Daniel entered, stamping snow off his boots. His cheeks were red from cold and ice crystals clung to his dark hair. "The storm's definitely weakening," he announced, pulling off his heavy coat. "Might be passable by tomorrow afternoon, if the temperature holds." He noticed Victoria's stricken expression and Emma's protective stance beside her. "Everything all right?" Emma looked between the two adults with the serious expression she wore when appointed as family translator. "Victoria's scared that bad people are going to steal her job. I told her she should just share it with them, but she says it's complicated." Daniel's eyes met Victoria's across the small room, and she saw understanding dawn in his expression. He'd recognized something in her panic, some echo of his own corporate past. "Emma, why don't you go organize your art supplies?" Daniel suggested gently. "I think Victoria and I need to talk about grown-up things for a minute." Emma nodded importantly and retreated to her bedroom, clearly sensing the weight of adult conversation she wasn't meant to hear. When they were alone, Daniel moved to the kitchen where Victoria still stood frozen, her phone clutched in white-knuckled fingers. "How big is your company?" he asked quietly. Victoria's carefully constructed walls crumbled completely. 800 employees, 12 offices across North America, revenue of just over $2 billion last year. Daniel's eyebrows rose slightly, but his expression remained calm. "And you're the CEO?" "CEO, majority shareholder, and daughter of the founder. My father built Ashford Technologies from nothing, started it in his garage 30 years ago with a dream of revolutionizing data security. When he died 5 years ago, I was 28 years old and completely unprepared to run a multinational corporation."
Ashford Technologies. Daniel's recognition was immediate. "The cybersecurity firm. Your father was Thomas Ashford?" Victoria nodded miserably. "You know the company?" "Know it? I used to work with your software every day at Morrison Systems. Ashford's encryption protocols are industry standard." Daniel sat down across from her, his expression thoughtful rather than intimidated. "Your father was a legend in the tech world. Completely ethical, refused to sell to the highest bidder when he could have made billions more with military contracts. He always said technology should protect people, not exploit them." Victoria wiped at her eyes, embarrassed by the tears that had started falling. "I've tried so hard to honor that vision, but the board, They want to sell to Meridian Corp, the defense contractor that my father specifically refused to work with. And you've been fighting them? For 2 years, ever since Meridian made their first offer. The board thinks I'm being sentimental, holding on to outdated principles. They say I'm letting emotion cloud business judgment. Victoria laughed bitterly. Maybe they're right. Maybe I should have sold years ago and taken the money. Daniel leaned forward, his voice intense. Your father didn't build that company for money. He built it to make the world safer. You think he'd want you to sell his life's work to the highest bidder? But 800 jobs, Daniel. 800 families depending on steady paychecks. If I keep fighting and the company fails completely, they all lose everything. At least with Meridian, most of them would keep their positions. Would they? Meridian's business model is built on cost-cutting and efficiency maximization. How many of those 800 employees do you think they'd consider redundant? Victoria had run those projections herself, late at night in her empty penthouse, and the numbers had made her sick. Meridian would likely cut staff by at least 40% within the first year. You know the answer to that, just like you know that your father didn't spend 30 years building something just to have it dismantled by corporate raiders. Then what am I supposed to do? Victoria's voice broke completely. I missed the board meeting. By now they've probably voted to accept Meridian's offer. Even if I could get back to Seattle tomorrow, it might be too late. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with those perceptive eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. Tell me something, he said finally. If money wasn't a factor, if the board's pressure didn't exist, if you could run Ashford Technologies exactly the way you wanted to, what would you do? Victoria closed her eyes, imagining a world where she could follow her heart instead of market pressures. I'd expand our consumer privacy division, develop affordable security solutions for small businesses and individual users, create technology that empowers people instead of surveilling them. She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. But that's not realistic in today's market. Why not? Because it would mean lower profit margins, slower growth, less aggressive expansion. The board would never approve it. Then maybe you need a different board. Victoria stared at him. You can't just replace a corporate board. They're elected by shareholders. You're the majority shareholder, aren't you? The words hit Victoria like lightning. In all her strategizing, all her corporate maneuvering, she had somehow forgotten the most basic fact of corporate governance. As majority shareholder, she had the power to reconstitute the board entirely. I am. Then you don't need their permission to save your father's company. You need the courage to believe in his vision and your own leadership. Daniel reached across the table, covering her hand with his warm, calloused one. You think he'd want you to sell his life's work to the highest bidder? Victoria felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening after being locked for years. For the first time since her father's death, she wasn't thinking about what the board wanted, or what the market expected, or what would be strategically safest. She was thinking about what Thomas Ashford would have wanted his daughter to do. And suddenly, the answer was crystal clear. Outside, the storm continued its retreat, and inside the cabin, Victoria Ashford, CEO, daughter, and guardian of a legacy worth fighting for, began her return to battle. As evening shadows stretched across the snow-covered landscape, Victoria found herself in the most unlikely situation of her corporate career, planning a business strategy while sitting on a braided rug in front of a stone fireplace with a 6-year-old offering input on corporate governance. Daniel had produced a stack of paper and pencils from Emma's art supplies, transforming the coffee table into a makeshift war room. Emma, appointed as official helper, sat cross-legged beside Victoria, earnestly drawing what she called the bad guys, stick figures with frowning faces and dark scribbles for hearts. Tell me about the board members, Daniel said, his software engineer's mind already working through the strategic complexities. Who are your allies? Who's leading the opposition? Victoria sketched out an organizational chart with practiced efficiency. There are 9 board members total. Patricia Chen and Robert Hayes are loyalists. They worked with my father from the early days. They'll support me no matter what. She marked 2 boxes with green. Marcus Weinstein and Julia Rodriguez are wild cards. They vote based on what they think is best for the company, not personal allegiance. 2 yellow boxes.
The other 5, she colored the remaining boxes red. They're led by Richard Blackstone, my father's former business partner. He's wanted to sell to the highest bidder since the day after my father's funeral.
What's Blackstone's motivation? Daniel asked, studying the chart with the same intensity he'd once brought to debugging complex code. Money, primarily. He owns a significant stake through his investment firm. A sale to Meridian would net him somewhere around $300 million. Victoria's voice hardened. He's also never forgiven my father for refusing his advice to take the company public in the early days. He thought we were leaving billions on the table. Emma looked up from her drawing. Why doesn't the mean man just make his own company if he wants lots of money? Because it's easier to take someone else's company than build your own, Victoria explained, struck by the child's instinctive understanding of the fundamental injustice. That's stealing, Emma declared with moral certainty. Corporate law calls it maximizing shareholder value, Victoria replied wryly. Daniel leaned back in his chair, processing the information. So you have 2 solid votes, maybe 4 if you can convince the wildcards. You need 5 to maintain control. The problem is Blackstone's influence. He's been systematically undermining my authority for months, questioning every decision, spreading doubt about my capability. Even the wildcards are starting to wonder if I'm too young, too inexperienced, too emotionally attached to my father's vision. Are you? The direct question caught Victoria off guard. What do you mean? Are you too emotionally attached? When you talk about preserving your father's legacy, is that about honoring his values or about proving something to yourself? Victoria set down her pencil, staring into the fire. It was the question she'd been avoiding for 2 years, the one that kept her awake at night in her empty penthouse. Both, she admitted finally. I was 28 when he died, barely qualified to run a departmental meeting, let alone a multinational corporation. Everyone expected me to fail. Blackstone, the media, half our employees. Maybe part of me has been trying to prove them wrong instead of just doing what's right. And now? Victoria looked around the warm cabin, at Emma's innocent drawing of corporate villains, at Daniel's patient expression, at the simple life they'd built here that somehow felt more real than anything in her glittering corporate world. Now, I realize I've been asking the wrong question. Instead of asking, how do I prove I belong in my father's chair, I should have been asking, what would make my father proud? Daniel nodded approvingly. That's the difference between defending a position and fighting for a purpose. Emma held up her drawing, a remarkably sophisticated battle scene showing small figures with smiling faces standing together against the dark, scribbled enemies. Look, the good guys are winning because they're helping each other. That's beautiful, sweetheart, Victoria said, genuinely moved by the child's optimistic vision. You're absolutely right. The good guys win when they work together. As if summoned by Emma's words, inspiration struck Victoria with crystalline clarity. She grabbed a fresh sheet of paper and began sketching rapidly. What if I'm approaching this all wrong? I've been thinking defensively, how to keep Blackstone from selling to Meridian. But what if instead of fighting the sale, I propose something better? Daniel leaned forward, intrigued. What kind of something? An employee stock ownership plan. Instead of selling to Meridian, we convert Ashford Technologies into a worker-owned cooperative. Every employee becomes a shareholder with voting rights and profit participation. That's... Daniel paused, working through the implications. That's brilliant. It protects the jobs, preserves the company culture, and gives everyone a stake in long-term success. More importantly, it honors my father's belief that technology should serve people, not exploit them. Victoria's pencil flew across the paper, sketching out financial models with the fluency of someone who had been born to this work. The board members who were truly concerned about employee welfare would have to support it. Even some of Blackstone's allies might be swayed if the numbers work. Emma looked up from the 2 adults, sensing their growing excitement. Are you going to beat the bad guys now? We're going to try, sweetheart, Victoria said, surprising herself with the inclusive pronoun. Daniel caught the slip too, his expression thoughtful. We. Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks. That is, I appreciate your strategic input, but I can't expect you to... Victoria, Daniel's voice was gentle but firm. You don't have to fight this alone anymore. The words hit her like a physical embrace. For 5 years since her father's death, she had carried the weight of Ashford Technologies entirely by herself. The loneliness of command had been perhaps the heaviest burden of all. Having no one who truly understood the pressure, no one she could trust with her deepest fears about failing. You barely know me, she protested weakly. I know enough. I know you'd rather risk everything than compromise your principles. I know you genuinely care about your employees' welfare. I know you're strong enough to take on corporate bullies and win. And I know you deserve to have someone in your corner. Emma, with the intuitive wisdom children possessed, scrambled up onto the couch between them. Daddy and I could be your family. Then you wouldn't have to fight the bad guys all by yourself. The casual offer of belonging hit her harder than any corporate betrayal ever had. These two people, who had known her barely 48 hours, were offering her something she'd never had in her entire adult life: unconditional support, without agenda. Emma, Victoria said carefully, families are more complicated than business partnerships.
No, they're not, Emma replied with characteristic certainty. Families are people who take care of each other and want each other to be happy. You take care of people at your company. Daddy takes care of me. We all want each other to be happy. That makes us family. Daniel watched Victoria process his daughter's simple logic, seeing the moment when her corporate armor finally cracked completely open. Besides, Emma continued pragmatically, Daddy knows about computers and you know about companies. Together, you'd be super smart. Victoria laughed despite herself. A real laugh, not the polished sound she deployed in boardrooms. You know what, Emma? You might be the smartest strategic thinker I've ever met. As night fell over the mountain cabin, Victoria found herself planning not just a corporate battle, but imagining a future she'd never dared consider. A future where professional success didn't require personal isolation. A future where she could build something meaningful while building a life worth living. The storm outside was nearly spent, but inside the cabin, something much more powerful was building. A partnership that just might be strong enough to save a company, honor a legacy, and prove that sometimes the most important mergers were the ones that happened in the heart. The morning of the third day dawned crystal clear, with brilliant sunlight reflecting off what seemed like miles of pristine snow. The storm had finally exhausted itself, leaving behind a world transformed into something magical and impossibly beautiful. But with the clearing skies came an unwelcome reminder that Victoria's refuge from reality was rapidly coming to an end. Daniel stood on the cabin's front porch, holding a steaming cup of coffee and surveying the damage. Several trees had fallen across the access road, their massive trunks creating formidable barriers between the cabin and the outside world. But the temperature was rising steadily, and he could already hear the distant rumble of snowplows working the main highway. "How long until the road's clear?" Victoria asked, joining him on the porch. She wore his spare winter coat over her designer clothes, looking like an executive who'd been kidnapped by mountain folk. "County crews will probably reach us by late afternoon. Another day or two for your car to be dug out, assuming it starts after being buried for 3 days. Victoria nodded, but he could see the tension creeping back into her shoulders. Soon she would have to leave this sanctuary and return to the corporate battlefield. More concerning to Daniel was the growing certainty that once she left, she might never come back. The sound of engines in the distance interrupted his thoughts. Through the trees they could see a convoy of vehicles making slow progress up the partially cleared road. SUVs with government plates, followed by what looked like news vans. "That's not the county road crew," Daniel observed grimly. Victoria's face went pale. "Someone leaked my location." Emma pressed her nose against the living room window, watching the approaching vehicles with curiosity rather than alarm. "Are those the bad guys?" she asked with the matter-of-fact tone she might use to inquire about dinner plans. "Some of them might be," Victoria said tightly, pulling out her phone.
The screen showed 17 missed calls and 43 text messages, all received in the past hour as cellular service had been restored. Her hands shook slightly as she scrolled through the avalanche of communications. The board meeting happened yesterday. They voted 6-3 to accept Meridian's offer. Patricia and Robert voted against, along with one of the wild cards, Julia Rodriguez. But it wasn't enough. Daniel moved closer, reading the messages over her shoulder. Most were from her assistant, Jennifer, whose increasingly frantic texts painted the picture of corporate chaos. Board members giving contradictory statements to the press, employees organizing protests, Meridian's lawyers already drafting transition documents. But the final message that made Victoria's blood run cold. Miss Ashford, Richard Blackstone is telling reporters you have suffered a mental health crisis and are unfit to lead the company. He's demanding a competency hearing. The media is calling it the missing CEO scandal. Please contact me immediately. Jennifer. Mental health crisis? Daniel's voice carried barely controlled anger. They're attacking your competency because you missed one meeting due to a natural disaster? It's a classic corporate power play, Victoria explained bitterly. Paint me as unstable, unreliable, emotionally compromised. If they can get a court to declare me mentally unfit, they can seize control of my shares. The lead SUV pulled up in front of the cabin, and Victoria recognized the sleek silver hair of Marcus Steinberg, Ashford Technologies' head of public relations. Behind him emerged a small army of corporate lawyers, board members, and media representatives. Emma tugged on Victoria's coat. Why do they all look so angry? Don't they know you're smart and nice? They don't want me to be smart and nice, sweetheart. They want me to do what they tell me to do. That's stupid. Daddy says smart people should make their own decisions. Before Victoria could respond, a sharp knock echoed through the cabin. Daniel moved to the door, his protective instincts clearly activated. Miss Ashford? Steinberg's voice carried through the wood. We need to speak with you immediately. There's been significant developments in your absence. Daniel looked to Victoria, silently asking for instruction. She straightened her shoulders, transforming before his eyes from the vulnerable woman who'd shared her fears by firelight into the steely executive who'd built a technology empire.
Let them in, she said quietly. But Daniel, Emma, you don't have to leave. This is your home. When Daniel opened the door, Steinberg swept in like an advancing army, followed by Richard Blackstone and 3 other board members Victoria recognized with sinking hearts. All of Blackstone's allies, plus Marcus Weinstein, one of the wild cards who'd apparently chosen sides. Victoria, thank God, Steinberg began, his relief clearly performed for the cameras that were undoubtedly recording from outside. When you missed the board meeting with no communication, we feared the worst. Are you injured? Have you been receiving medical attention? The concern was entirely fake, but Victoria could see the strategic brilliance behind it. By expressing worry for her well-being in front of witnesses, they were laying groundwork for the competency challenge. I'm perfectly fine, Marcus, Victoria replied coolly. I was trapped by the blizzard, like thousands of other people across the state. Hardly grounds for a psychiatric evaluation. Richard Blackstone stepped forward, his expression a masterpiece of false concern. Victoria, my dear, we understand you've been under tremendous stress. Running a company of Ashford's size is an enormous burden for someone so young. Perhaps it's time to consider stepping back, letting more experienced hands guide the ship. The ship you just voted to sell to Meridian Corp., Victoria countered. How convenient that my temporary absence gave you the excuse to execute a plan you've been pushing for 2 years. The board acted in the best interests of shareholders and employees, Blackstone replied smoothly. Meridian's offer represents unprecedented value. Fighting it any further would be a disservice to everyone who depends on Ashford Technologies. Emma had been listening to this exchange with the intense concentration she usually reserved for her favorite bedtime stories. Suddenly, she marched over to Blackstone and stared up at him with the fearless directness that only children possessed. "Are you the main bad guy?" she asked with genuine curiosity.
Blackstone looked down at Emma with undisguised irritation. "Who is this child? Victoria, surely you understand that corporate governance isn't appropriate entertainment for—" "This is Emma Jordan," Victoria interrupted, her voice carrying a warmth that had been completely absent when addressing the board members. "She's helped me think through some complex strategic questions over the past few days." Daniel stepped closer to his daughter, his presence protective but not aggressive. Victoria could see Blackstone cataloging every detail: the modest cabin, Daniel's work clothes, Emma's innocent questions, all ammunition for painting Victoria as someone who'd lost touch with corporate reality. "Miss Ashford," Steinberg interjected, "we have a helicopter standing by to take you back to Seattle. The media is calling for a press conference, the employees are demanding answers, and Meridian's legal team is threatening to withdraw their offer if there are any further delays." Victoria felt the familiar weight of corporate pressure settling on her shoulders. All the old instincts kicked in, the need to manage the crisis, control the narrative, preserve what could be preserved of her authority and reputation. But then she looked at Daniel, who was watching her with steady confidence in his eyes, at Emma, who had classified the corporate intrusion as simply another problem to be solved, at the warm cabin that had become more of a home in 3 days than her penthouse had been in 5 years. "Actually," Victoria said, her voice gaining strength, "I think I'll drive back to Seattle myself, tomorrow morning." The collective intake of breath from the corporate delegation was almost comical. "Victoria," Blackstone said, his veneer of concern finally cracking, "you cannot delay this any longer. The merger documents need your signature. The transition timeline is already set. Every hour you delay costs the company millions in market confidence." "Then it's a good thing I have a better proposal. One that will save more jobs, preserve more value, and honor the principles my father built this company on." She looked around the room, at the corporate sharks who'd been circling for years, at Daniel and Emma who'd shown her what really mattered, at the simple cabin that had somehow become the birthplace of her revolution. "Gentlemen," she said with a smile that was both gracious and absolutely deadly, "I think you're going to be very surprised by what I've learned during my time in the wilderness." The battle for Ashford Technologies was about to begin in earnest, but for the first time in years, Victoria felt like she was fighting for something worth winning. The corporate delegation had barely settled into their vehicles when Daniel's phone rang. Tom Martinez, the retired forest ranger from next door, sounded breathless and concerned. "Dan, you've got about 50 reporters setting up camp at the bottom of your access road. Word's gotten out about your house guest. Some fancy news helicopter tried to land in my pasture an hour ago. Thought you should know what you're dealing with." Daniel looked out the window, where media vans were indeed visible through the trees, their satellite dishes extended like mechanical flowers turning toward the cabin. Victoria stood frozen in the living room, watching the growing circus with something approaching horror. "Daddy, why are there so many cars?" Emma asked, pressing her face against the glass. "Are they here for Victoria's company meeting?" "Something like that, sweetheart," Joel replied, though he was beginning to understand that this situation was far beyond a simple business disagreement.
Victoria's phone buzzed constantly with incoming calls. She'd stopped answering after the 5th reporter, but the voicemails kept coming. Jennifer, her assistant, sounded increasingly frantic. "CNN is running a story about your mental state. Fox Business is speculating about a hostile takeover. The Wall Street Journal wants comment on Blackstone's claims that you've been having paranoid episodes. Please call me back." "They're destroying my reputation in real time," Victoria said, her voice hollow. "By tonight, every business network will be questioning my fitness to lead. Blackstone's probably giving exclusive interviews right now, painting me as an unstable heiress who cracked under pressure." Daniel moved to stand beside her at the window, his presence steady and calming. "So we control the narrative instead of letting them control it." "We?" "Victoria, I meant what I said yesterday. You don't fight this alone." Daniel's voice carried quiet determination. "What do you need to make your employee ownership plan work?" Victoria was quiet for a moment, her strategic mind automatically shifting into planning mode despite the chaos outside. Legal documentation, financial projections, employee surveys to gauge support. Most importantly, I need to present it to the full workforce before Blackstone can paint it as another sign of my instability. How long would that take to organize? Weeks if we do it properly, but we don't have weeks. Victoria gestured toward the media encampment. Every day this drags on, more employees will start believing Blackstone's version of events. Emma had been listening to their conversation with the focused attention she gave to particularly interesting fairy tales. Suddenly, she tugged on Victoria's sleeve. "Why don't you just talk to all the people at once?" Emma suggested with the practical logic of childhood. "Like when Daddy had to tell everyone in town about the water problem. He just went to the community center and talked to everybody together." Victoria and Daniel exchanged glances. "A town hall meeting," Daniel said slowly, "but for 800 employees across 12 offices." "A live-streamed town hall meeting," Victoria finished, her eyes beginning to shine with possibility. "We could set it up in Seattle headquarters, broadcast it to all locations simultaneously, bypass the media entirely and speak directly to the workforce." Daniel was already reaching for his laptop. "I can handle the technical setup, streaming platforms, secure connections, interactive Q&A systems. Give me 6 hours and I can have you broadcasting to thousands of people." "You do that?" Victoria asked, surprised by his immediate willingness to dive into her corporate crisis. "Victoria, I helped Morrison Systems set up virtual conferences for clients all over the world. This is exactly the kind of challenge I used to love. Besides, employee ownership of tech companies? That's not just good business, it's revolutionary. Your father would be proud." Emma bounced excitedly. "Can I help too? I'm really good at organizing things." Victoria knelt down to Emma's level, taking the little girl's hands in hers. "Emma, this might get complicated and boring. Are you sure you want to be involved?" "Victoria," Emma said with a serious tone she used for important declarations, "you're our family now. Family helps family, even when it's boring." The simple statement hit Victoria like an emotional tsunami. In her corporate world, every relationship was transactional, every alliance based on mutual benefit. But this 6-year-old was offering unconditional support based on purely love and loyalty. "Besides," Emma continued pragmatically, "Daddy always says the best way to beat bullies is to tell everyone the truth really loudly so they can't pretend to be nice anymore." "That's my girl, always cutting straight to the heart of things." Victoria felt something shift fundamentally in her chest. For the first time since her father's death, she wasn't facing a crisis alone. She had allies who believed in her not because of what she could do for them, but because of who she was becoming. The phone rang again. This time it was Patricia Chen, one of Victoria's few loyal board members. "Victoria, thank God, where have you been? Blackstone is telling everyone you've had a nervous breakdown. He's already filed papers for an emergency competency hearing." "When?" "Tomorrow afternoon. He's claiming you pose a danger to shareholder value and employee welfare. The judge is allowing expedited proceedings due to the company's public status." Victoria felt the walls closing in. A competency hearing could result in her being declared mentally unfit to manage her own affairs, let alone a multinational corporation. Even if she won eventually, the legal battle could take months, during which Blackstone would have operational control. "Patricia, I need you to do something for me," Victoria said, her voice gaining strength. "Call an emergency all-hands meeting for tomorrow morning. Every employee, every office, mandatory attendance. Tell them their CEO is making a major announcement about the company's future." "Victoria, that's highly irregular. Blackstone will say it proves you're acting erratically." "Let him. By tomorrow afternoon, it won't matter what Blackstone says because he won't have the votes to control anything." After hanging up, Victoria turned to find Daniel and Emma watching her with expressions of expectation and trust. "Well," Daniel said with a slight smile, "sounds like we have our work cut out for us. Emma, want to help us save a company?" Emma jumped up and down with excitement. "Yes! What do I do first?"
Victoria looked around the humble cabin that had somehow become the headquarters for the most important battle of her professional life. Outside, reporters and corporate sharks circled like predators sensing blood in the water. But inside, she had something they couldn't understand or defeat. A family willing to fight for what was right, regardless of the personal cost. "First," Victoria said, pulling out her laptop and setting it on the kitchen table next to Emma's art supplies, "we're going to show 800 employees exactly what employee ownership looks like, and we're going to do it in a way that would make my father proud." As afternoon turned to evening, the unlikely war room buzzed with activity. Daniel worked on technical specifications, while Emma organized documents with the methodical precision she usually reserved for arranging her stuffed animals. Victoria drafted the most important speech of her life, knowing that in less than 18 hours, she would either save her father's legacy or lose everything she'd worked for. But for the first time in years, the prospect of losing didn't terrify her. Because win or lose, she'd already found something more valuable than any corporate empire. A family willing to stand with her against any storm. The Ashford Technologies headquarters in Seattle had never seen anything like it. By 9 a.m., all 12 conference rooms were packed with employees connected via Daniel's hastily assembled but flawlessly executed streaming network. The main auditorium buzzed with nervous energy as 800 workers gathered for what many suspected might be their final meeting as Ashford employees. Victoria stood in the wings of the auditorium stage, wearing the same designer suit she'd packed for what was supposed to be a routine business trip 4 days ago. But everything else about her had fundamentally changed. Her phone showed dozens of missed calls from Blackstone and his allies, all demanding to know what she was planning to announce. "Technical check complete," Daniel's voice came through her earpiece. He was stationed in the building's IT center, monitoring feeds from all 12 offices simultaneously. "Emma's got your backup presentation files organized by priority, and she's designated herself as your official courage consultant." Despite her nerves, Victoria smiled. Emma had insisted on coming to Seattle, declaring that Victoria needed family backup for such an important day. The 6-year-old was currently stationed in Victoria's executive office, surrounded by printed presentation materials she'd organized with military precision. "2 minutes, Miss Ashford." Jennifer, her assistant, appeared at Victoria's elbow. "The board members are in the front row. Mr. Blackstone looks displeased." Through the stage curtains, Victoria could see her corporate adversaries, seated like judges at an execution. Blackstone wore the satisfied expression of someone who believed he'd already won. The wild cards, Marcus Weinstein and Julia Rodriguez, looked genuinely confused, clearly wondering what Victoria could possibly say that would change anything. But it was the faces of her employees that gave Victoria strength. She saw Linda Morrison from accounting, who worked for her father since the company's founding. James Park from software development, whose innovative security protocols had saved them millions. Maria Santos from HR, who remembered every employee's birthday and organized the charity drives that had become company tradition. These weren't just workers or profit centers. They were her father's extended family, and she was about to offer them something unprecedented in corporate America. "Daddy says you're going to be brilliant," Emma's voice crackled through the earpiece. "And I drew you a picture of you being the boss of the bad guys. It's in your jacket pocket for good luck." Victoria reached into her pocket and felt the folded paper. On it, Emma had drawn a stick figure, wearing a business suit and a cape, standing triumphantly over defeated villains. The childish artwork gave her more confidence than any MBA case study ever had. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jennifer announced to the auditorium, "please welcome CEO Victoria Ashford." Victoria walked onto the stage to scattered applause, noting how the sound was more cautious than enthusiastic. These people had been hearing rumors about her mental state for days. Many probably expected to witness a breakdown. Instead, They saw a woman who looked more focused and determined than she had in years. "Good morning," Victoria began, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium and across the streaming network to 11 other offices. "I know there's been speculation about my absence this week, about my fitness to lead this company, about what Meridian Corp's offer means for your futures. Today, I'm going to tell you the truth about it all." She clicked to her first slide, a photo of her father in his garage workshop, surrounded by the primitive computers that would eventually become Ashford Technologies' first products. Thomas Ashford founded this company on a simple principle: technology should empower people, not exploit them. For 30 years, we've stayed true to that vision even when it cost us profit margins, even when competitors called us naive, even when board members pressured us to compromise our values for shareholder returns. Blackstone shifted uncomfortably in his front row seat. He'd clearly expected a defensive justification of her recent absence, not a philosophical challenge to his entire approach. This week, the board voted to sell Ashford Technologies to Meridian Corp for $12 billion. It's a financially attractive offer that would make our shareholders wealthy, and our board members even wealthier.
Victoria clicked to the next slide, Meridian's corporate structure and defense contracting history. But Meridian isn't buying us for our consumer privacy tools or our small business security solutions. They want our encryption technology for military applications, our user data for surveillance systems, our employee expertise for projects that directly contradict everything this company was built to represent. A murmur ran through the auditorium. Many employees hadn't known the full extent of Meridian's defense contracting business. More importantly, Victoria continued, their business model calls for eliminating 40% of our workforce within the first year. 4 out of 10 people in this room would lose their jobs so that Meridian's efficiency metrics look better to their shareholders. The murmur became a rumble of anger and concern. Victoria could see Blackstone whispering urgently to his allies, but it was too late to stop her momentum. "So I'm here to propose something different. Something that honors my father's vision while securing your futures and preserving the values that make Ashford Technologies worth working for." Victoria clicked to her most important slide, the employee ownership proposal Daniel had helped her refine through the night. "Instead of selling to Meridian, I'm proposing to sell to you. Every employee becomes a shareholder with voting rights, profit participation, and a voice in company decisions. We become a worker-owned cooperative that prioritizes employee welfare and ethical technology development over maximum profit extraction." The auditorium erupted. Employees were on their feet, talking excitedly among themselves. The streaming chat feeds that Daniel was monitoring exploded with messages of support and enthusiasm. Blackstone stood up abruptly, his face red with rage. "This is precisely the kind of delusional thinking that proves Victoria's unfitness to lead," he announced, his voice carrying over the crowd noise. "Employee ownership is financial suicide. No serious investor would support such a naive scheme." Victoria had been expecting this exact attack. "Actually, Richard, employee-owned companies consistently outperform traditionally structured corporations in both profitability and job security. But more importantly, this isn't about what investors want, it's about what our employees deserve." She clicked to financial projections that Daniel had helped her model based on successful employee ownership transitions at other tech companies. The numbers work. Employee productivity increases an average of 15% when workers have ownership stakes. Customer satisfaction improves because employees are invested in long-term relationships rather than short-term profits. Innovation flourishes because good ideas come from people who will directly benefit from the company's success. Julia Rodriguez, one of the wildcard board members, stood up. "Victoria, this is fascinating in theory, but the legal complexities alone would take months to resolve. The Meridian offer expires in 72 hours. Which is why I've already had preliminary legal documents prepared. Every employee who wants to participate can sign a commitment letter today. We'll have majority worker support documented before the board's final vote tomorrow."
The auditorium was electric with possibility. Victoria could see employees calculating what ownership stakes might mean for their families, their futures, their sense of purpose at work. Blackstone played his final card. The competency hearing this afternoon will determine whether Victoria has the mental capacity to make such momentous decisions. I suggest we all wait for that legal determination before committing to any radical restructuring. This was the moment Victoria had been preparing for all morning. She walked to the front of the stage, looking out over 800 faces that represented not just jobs, but lives and dreams, and the future her father had envisioned. "Richard's right about one thing," she said, her voice carrying absolute conviction. "This is a momentous decision, but it's not my decision to make alone. It's yours." She clicked to her final slide. A simple question. Do you want to own your future? The response was immediate and overwhelming. Employees throughout the auditorium rose to their feet, applauding with an enthusiasm that had nothing to do with corporate politeness and everything to do with genuine hope. In her earpiece, Daniel's voice was filled with pride and amazement. "Victoria, the response from all 12 offices is unanimous. They want to do this." Emma's voice joined his. "You beat the bad guys. You beat them with good ideas." Standing on the stage, surrounded by the thunderous approval of workers who were about to become owners, Victoria felt something she'd never experienced in all her years of corporate success: the absolute certainty that she was doing exactly what her father would have wanted. The battle for Ashford Technologies was far from over, but in that moment Victoria knew she already won the only victory that truly mattered. She'd given 800 people the chance to control their own destinies, and she'd done it with the support of the most unlikely family she could have ever imagined. The King County Courthouse at 2 p.m. was packed beyond capacity. What should have been a routine competency hearing had become the most watched corporate drama of the year, with reporters lining the hallways and live news trucks filling the parking lot. The business world was holding its breath to see if Victoria Ashford would be declared mentally unfit to run her own company. Judge Margaret Foster, a stern woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes, surveyed the packed courtroom with obvious displeasure. "This is a legal proceeding, not a circus. Anyone who cannot maintain proper decorum will be removed." Victoria sat at the defendant's table with her legal team, but her eyes kept drifting to the gallery where Daniel and Emma occupied seats in the third row. Emma wore her best dress, purple naturally, and clutched a folder containing what she declared to be important papers to help Victoria.
Blackstone's attorney, Marcus Webb, was a shark in an expensive suit who'd made a career of corporate character assassination. He rose to address the judge with practiced solemnity. "Your Honor, we're here because Victoria Ashford has demonstrated a pattern of erratic behavior that poses a genuine threat to the welfare of 800 employees and thousands of shareholders. Her unauthorized absence during a critical board meeting, her refusal to respond to urgent communications, and this morning's radical restructuring proposal all indicate someone who has lost touch with reality." Webb clicked through a presentation designed to paint Victoria as unstable. Surveillance photos of her at the cabin, looking disheveled in Daniel's clothes. Excerpts from news reports speculating about her mental state. Testimony from board members questioning her judgment. "Most concerning," Webb continued, "is Ms. Ashford's apparent belief that she can simply ignore corporate governance and restructure a multi-billion-dollar company based on idealistic fantasies developed during what can only be described as a psychological episode." Victoria watched the character assassination with surprising calm. A week ago, such attacks would have sent her into defensive mode, scrambling to protect her carefully constructed image. But sitting in this courtroom, surrounded by people who'd seen her at her most vulnerable and loved her anyway, she felt something she'd never experienced before: complete authenticity. "Ms. Ashford," Judge Foster addressed her directly, "how do you respond to these allegations?" Victoria rose slowly, looking first at the judge, then at the packed courtroom, and finally at Daniel and Emma.
Emma gave her an encouraging thumbs up and whispered loudly enough for half the courtroom to hear. "Tell them the truth really loudly." Despite everything, Victoria smiled. "Your Honor, I'd like to call my first witness." Webb objected immediately. "This isn't a trial, Your Honor. The burden is on Ms. Ashford to prove her competency, not to mount a defense." "Nevertheless," Judge Foster ruled, "I'm interested in hearing what Ms. Ashford has to say. Proceed." "I call Linda Morrison to the stand." The accounting department supervisor, who'd worked for Thomas Ashford since the company's founding, walked nervously to the witness box. She'd volunteered to testify after the morning's employee meeting, despite obvious anxiety about public speaking. "Miss Morrison," Victoria began, "how long have you worked for Ashford Technologies?" 28 years next month," Linda replied, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "During that time, have you observed my leadership style and decision-making process?" "Yes, ma'am, closely. I prepare all the financial reports you review." "In your professional opinion, based on nearly 3 decades of experience in corporate finance, do my recent decisions regarding employee ownership reflect mental instability or sound business judgment?" Linda straightened in her chair. "Sound business judgment. The best I've seen since your father was alive, if I'm being honest." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Webb rose to object, but Judge Foster waved him down. "Miss Morrison," Victoria continued, "can you explain why you believe employee ownership is a sound strategy?" "Because we're the ones who make the company work. We know what customers need, what systems are failing, what innovations could save money and improve service. When workers have a stake in success, they work harder and smarter. It's not complicated." Victoria called 6 more employee witnesses, representatives from different departments who'd all volunteered to testify. Each painted the same picture: a CEO who'd finally started listening to the people who actually understood the business, who'd proposed solutions that honored both financial realities and human dignity. When the employee testimony concluded, Victoria approached the witness stand herself. "Your Honor, Mr. Webb is correct that I missed a board meeting due to being trapped by a blizzard. He's correct that I've proposed restructuring the company as an employee-owned cooperative. What he's failed to mention is that both of these facts demonstrate exactly the kind of leadership Ashford Technologies needs." She gestured toward Daniel and Emma in the gallery. "During my time at Daniel Jordan's cabin, I was reminded of something I'd forgotten in years of corporate maneuvering. The purpose of business isn't to maximize shareholder returns at any cost. It's to create value for everyone involved: employees, customers, communities." Judge Foster leaned forward. "Are you saying your absence was beneficial to your decision-making?" "I'm saying it was essential. For 5 years since my father's death, I've been so focused on proving I belonged in his chair that I forgot why the chair mattered. I was making decisions based on fear of failure rather than vision for success." She pulled out Emma's drawing from her jacket pocket, the stick-figure CEO with a cape defeating the corporate villains. "A very wise 6-year-old reminded me this week that the purpose of being powerful is to help people, not to accumulate more power. Employee ownership isn't a radical fantasy. It's a return to the values my father built this company on." She looked directly at Blackstone, who was glowering from his seat behind Webb's table. "The real question this court should consider isn't whether I'm mentally fit to run Ashford Technologies. It's whether anyone who would sell our employees' futures to the highest bidder is morally fit to make decisions affecting 800 families." Judge Foster was quiet for a long moment, reviewing her notes. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of years on the bench. "Mr. Webb, your client has presented a case based entirely on speculation about Miss Ashford's mental state. But every witness who actually works with her has testified to her competence and sound judgment. The so-called erratic behavior appears to consist of missing one meeting due to a natural disaster and proposing an innovative business structure that has widespread employee support." She fixed Blackstone with a stern look.
More troubling to this court is the attempt to use psychiatric evaluation as a weapon in what is clearly a corporate power struggle. Miss Ashford's competency is not in question here. Her business judgment, based on the testimony I've heard, appears to be excellent. The gavel came down with finality. Motion for competency evaluation is denied. Miss Ashford retains full authority over her corporate responsibilities. The courtroom erupted in applause from the Ashford employees who'd packed the gallery. Blackstone stormed out, his face purple with rage, followed by his allies and their expensive legal team. Victoria felt arms wrap around her waist and looked down to see Emma hugging her fiercely. "You did it," Emma declared. "You beat all the bad guys with good ideas and truth-telling." Daniel approached more slowly, his eyes shining with pride and something deeper that made Victoria's heart race. "So," he said quietly, "what happens now?" Victoria looked around the courthouse, at the employees celebrating their victory, at the reporters scrambling to capture the story of the CEO who'd chosen her workers over corporate profits, at Judge Foster gathering her papers with obvious satisfaction. "Now we build something my father would be proud of, an employee-owned company that proves businesses can be both profitable and principled." Emma tugged on Victoria's skirt. "And then will you come live with us? Because our cabin has room for you, and Daddy makes really good pancakes every morning." Victoria knelt down to Emma's level, her heart full to bursting. "Sweetheart, I have a big company to run. That means lots of meetings and travel and boring adult stuff." "But you could run it from our mountain," Emma pointed out with irrefutable logic. "Companies are just people, and people can talk to each other from anywhere." Victoria looked up at Daniel, seeing her own hope reflected in his eyes. "Is that an official invitation?" "It's whatever you want it to be. A job offer, a partnership proposal, or," he paused, taking her hands in his, "a family invitation that comes with pancakes, braided hair, and someone who loves you exactly as you are." 3 months later, the business journals would write extensively about Ashford Technology's unprecedented transition to employee ownership, about productivity gains that exceeded all projections, about the innovative remote management structure that allowed CEO Victoria Ashford to run a multinational corporation from a renovated mountain cabin. They wrote about the new corporate model she'd pioneered, where success was measured not just in profit margins, but in employee satisfaction, environmental responsibility, and technological innovation that empowered rather than exploited. But none of the business articles captured the most important part of the story: how a woman who thought success meant isolation discovered that the greatest achievements come when you have someone to share them with. Victoria Ashford had entered that blizzard as a lonely CEO fighting to save her company. She emerged as a daughter, a partner, a mother figure, and a revolutionary who'd proven that sometimes the best business decision is the one that puts people first. And every morning, as she sat at her kitchen table reviewing reports while Emma braided her hair and Daniel made pancakes, Victoria knew her father would have been proud of the legacy she'd chosen to build. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.